I was having trouble with my faith, and I've been going through a lot of struggles in life, went through a horrible divorce, domestic violence, and it's just been a rough couple of years. And I was in bed that night, and I asked God, if you're real, I want to see Bigfoot before I die. And the very next day, I saw two. Hi, I'm Khym Christensen. I grew up in the southern Oregon coast in a beautiful region with timber and rivers, and the ocean is just a few miles from my home. So I grew up on a homestead here, and it's just a beautiful area. And I think the easiest way, I think we can go this way. It's a maze, so. Okay, good boy, come on. Okay. This is really interesting terrain too, because there are so many spots where things can hide. When I first heard about Bigfoot, I was about 6 years old, and I grew up on a homestead and lived with my grandmother, and we had just gotten our TV set, so my family would come over to visit for Sunday night, and after dinner we would all watch TV as a family. And I remember this show was on TV. It was about, I believe it was mysterious monsters, and there was this monster looking in somebody's living room window, and it was scary. So I'm sitting on the couch next to my dad, and we're watching this show. And as soon as the episode was over, my Uncle Hans, he got up and shut the TV off. And he turned and faced my grandmother. And he told us all about his Bigfoot encounter that happened when he was younger. And I'm just a little kid, and I'm sitting there thinking, there's no monsters. What is he talking about? You know, so he shared his story where he would deliver lumber to the next town up the coast. It's about 25 miles to Coos Bay. And back then it was called Marshfield. So there was a ferry from Bandon over the Coquille River, and then it went through old growth timber through this windy dirt road to get to Charleston and Marshfield, where they sold their timber. And he told my grandma that on his way home, it was after dark, and this big creature stepped out of the forest in front of his truck, and it turned and leaned over and screamed at him in his face through the windshield. And he said it screamed louder than any woman could. And he described it as being taller than the truck. He said it scared him so bad, he put the truck in reverse and backed all the way out of Seven Devils, which was super windy, curvy, narrow dirt road in an old growth forest. He turned around and went back to Marshfield and stayed overnight. So that was his story. And that was the first ever Bigfoot story I'd heard. And what was interesting is he never mentioned it again. So my uncle grew up here, you know, in the logging industry, building these communities. And he was a really tough man. He helped build logging roads. So he was always out in the woods, you know, making a living here off the land. So basically, after I heard that story, I really didn't want to believe it. So as a little kid, I just filed it away in the back of my mind and went about being a little kid. So basically, it wasn't until the 90s that I really thought about it again. I mean, I heard a random story here and there about maybe Bigfoot being up the rivers or something, but I didn't give it much weight. And then in the 90s, I leased a mining claim up one of our local rivers for the summer. And my kids were with me. They were about between 7 and 9 years old. I had 2 boys and my dog, and we were going to spend the entire summer, just camping out in the woods in this neat little cabin. It reminded me of the homestead because there was no power, no water. We had kerosene lamps and a wood cook stove, and it was just so cute, and it was going to be a fun summer. So I packed the kids and the dog up and we drove out there to the trailhead, and the trail is about a 45-minute downhill hike to this river, and then the trail goes upriver and downriver. So you hike another half hour down river to the cabin site. And it's really remote and beautiful. It was like the coolest thing. So I was like enjoying the area. My kids have been playing all day, and I think it was the second night. And the kids were tired. It was super late, and I remember cooking dinner late and feeding them and putting them to sleep. And they fell asleep like right away. Like they passed out like a rock. So it was like, and as soon as I turned that kerosene lantern off, something hit the side of the cabin like a freight train, like really hard. And I'm standing there in the dark, just trying to understand what was going on. And at the time, I had a small firearm. I grabbed my firearm because I think it was in my purse. And I'm standing there in the dark listening to this thing beating on the side of the wall. It was like bam, bam, bam. And my dog was with me, and she was like whimpering, and she laid down behind my feet. And the whole night, for the rest of the night, I was just scared to death, listening to this creature outside. I didn't know what it was, circling around the cabin, standing in the dark, pointing my gun at the sounds I was hearing. And at one point, it came to the front door and hit the front door really hard. And I thought it was going to break in. So I'm like a terrified mother. I'm protecting my children. And that was like the longest night ever. That was scary. And that's when I actually realized my uncle was telling the truth. Like there's something out here that I couldn't wrap my head around at the time. Anything could be hiding in these little holes in this forest. Like, it's really, it's a cool environment. There could be something just right around the corner and you'd never know it. Good boy. So this is the ridge line, and I was way down there heading south along the side of the tree line. And can't see it exactly from here, but this is where I had my sighting. Wait for me, Floke. I was working my way along this ridge line up under the edge of the trees, heading this south. So I'll show you exactly where I was. As soon as daylight broke, I packed my kids up and headed out, hiked clear back up to the car through an old growth forest. I didn't tell them what had happened because they were sound asleep, and I don't think they even remembered anything happening. And I remember on the way out, there was a little side trail. We were about 3/4 of the way up. There's a side trail. And my dog heard something over the bank and started growling, and all the hair on the back of her neck raised up. And she started to chase it. So she dropped out of sight. And then she turned right around, came back onto the trail, and just stood her ground between me and whatever she had seen. But I never saw anything. So I'm like, I don't know what she saw or sensed, but I just hiked out of there, got my kids in the car, and left. I'm like, that was just, it took me a while to understand what that was. So at that point, I went home and I decided we're not going back down there, even though I had paid for the lease for the summer. I didn't tell the claim owners that I was leaving, and I didn't ask for a refund. not for like 20 years. I really didn't talk to anybody until about 2016 or 17. Well, in 2016 or 17, I heard about a convention that was in Bend, Oregon. It was called Bigfoot and Brews. And I decided I have to go. You know, I have stories and I wanted to go talk to people about what I had experienced here. And so it was really exciting for me to go and meet people and actually finally share my stories. Yeah, it was a really big relief to actually be able to talk to somebody that had similar stories and encounters and not feel ridiculed or, you know, like people look at you like you're crazy. So, yeah, that was really great. Right after that, I went back and found a trackway after the cabin experience. So about a month later, I decided to go back up to the mountains, and I had cabin fever. So it was between storms. We have big Pacific storms roll in, and it had been raining for weeks, and it was just miserable. And then so when the storm was over, I decided to go for a drive. So we had some beautiful sunny days in between the next storm system. So I drove back up to the trailhead that goes down to the cabin about a month after the experience down there. And on my way in, I could tell there was no cars on the Forest Service road. There was tree debris and pine needles and no tire tracks. So I was like the first car up the mountain. And about 3/4 of the way there, I saw what looked like a pile of bear poop in the middle of the road. And it's steaming, like it's really fresh. So I was kind of excited I might see a bear. And so I stopped the car, I got out, I inspected the pile of poop, and steam was rising off of it. And I'm like, if I hurry, maybe they've stayed on the road, and I'll go up around the corner and I'll see a bear, maybe. So it was like there was a rock wall on one side and a really steep cliff on the other side. So I'm thinking maybe it stayed on the road. So I jumped back in my pickup and follow, the road around these corners. And I saw scuff marks going up this bank, really big marks. Like, okay, the bear went this way. So I got out of my car to look at the bear tracks, which I thought it was a bear. And when I got up to the top of this mound, I saw these big human-shaped footprints, like barefoot. And I'm standing there, it's early morning, beautiful sunny day, and I'm looking at these tracks going, what kind of crazy person would be up in the mountains barefoot after this big storm we just had? It didn't make sense. And then I'm looking at the tracks again, and I realized they're about 20 inches, maybe give or take, but they were huge. And I'm like going, oh my God. That's when it really hit me the hardest that my uncle's story was true. Because not only did I have something beating on the cabin wall a month prior, I actually found a trackway. So I followed these tracks along this bank ridgeline, and it was like really soft, wet sand mixed with some gravel. So it was like really beautiful impressions. And this was back in the 90s, so I didn't have a cell phone or don't carry a camera in my car. So I had no way to really, document it. But I was so curious that I followed the tracks. I want to say it was a good 40 yards. And there was 2 sets. The bigger set was probably around, 20 inches or so, maybe a little smaller. The second set was about a size 13 man. So, my first husband was big. He was over 6 feet, and he had around a size 13. So that was my best estimate at the smaller set of tracks. And I'm like, oh my gosh. So I followed him. What was interesting was I got about 3/4 of the way down the track set. The smaller set had jumped off the back of the bank about 10 or 15 feet down the back of the hill. And then right past that was a sheer cliff drop-off. And there's just one set of tracks. So I'm standing there looking at this trackway, thinking, what happened? The smaller one jumped off. So I jumped down next to it, and I'm about 110 pounds. So my feet sank about 2 inches into the soil. the track set that had jumped off the bank was that deep. And I'm standing there looking at this going, oh my God, that animal was heavy, really heavy. So then I'm looking back up to where I had jumped from, and there's no tracks from there going back up the hill. And I'm thinking, that's really strange. Where did this one go? So I climb back up the hill and I'm inspecting the tracks. The bigger set had turned sideways, got deeper in the ground, like maybe it had reached down, picked the other one up, set it back on the trail in front of it. And that was like, oh my God, because I actually did that once with my own kids. When my sons had jumped off the bank, reached down, grabbed his coat, set him back on the trail, and we're going this way. So then the track set continued, where it went off into the forest, and then they disappeared around this really steep area where I couldn't follow the tracks any further. Yeah, right. It was actually right over here. So me and Floki had came right out of here. This is where I heard the voices coming from, over the edge of that dune in the forest. So me and Floki went this way towards the voices. And then instead of going that way, I decided to go through the trees right here. And Floki was right in front of me. I grew up playing in the woods. We have bear, elk, deer. When I was 9, I actually was face to face with a bull elk. I was eating huckleberries, and I look up, and there's this big black nose staring at me. And as I look up, I see the eyes and horns, and it snorted in my face. So I guess growing up with wildlife, I wasn't really afraid of large animals. So it was like just part of nature and part of normal living here. So I spent a lot of time fishing and hunting, and we had cattle. So growing up on a ranch with all kinds of farm animals, I was used to large animals. This is Lucky. He was a rescue from Montana. He has a long story too. He was an orphan. Well, at that point, I realized that my uncle was telling the truth. And then I just went home and I had kids, a job. I was working, and I just really didn't put much into it until several years later. I ended up with a box of files, and there was a story in there from the 1800s where the miners had been killed and attacked by Bigfoot over a period of years. And I learned that it was the exact same cabin that I had leased in the 90s. So then I learned about this really neat historical story from the region. So I started doing more research into that, not all the time, but just occasionally when I had time to go camping, I would go out there to this area. And I got really interested in the historical aspect, besides the fact that I had an experience. And because I enjoy nature and rock hounding and prospecting, it was an excuse to go up in the woods and enjoy, nature and other activities. And as I started looking for the locations of these old mining claims from the 1800s stories, I started having more experiences. So I have old map sets where I would go off of the main trails to find the original trails that the old timers used to go into these different areas. So I would go through the woods away from where people would normally go. And then one time there's a lake up in the woods that I found, and it was right at dark. Something by the lake started making a bunch of noise. I thought it was owls. And then it turned into these coyote sounds, like a pack of coyotes just going crazy. And then two creatures started running through the brush at us, through the understory in the dark, and then turned into this great ape-sounding sound as it was rushing towards our campsite. And then right after that, they didn't break through into the open. It was like right at dusk where you can just barely see still, but it was really dark under the forest. And these creatures that were rushing through the forest, breaking limbs, snapping brush, they turned and went across the spring cut and up on the bank and started throwing rocks at the campsite. So I think that was my next major after the cabin. And I want to say that was probably around 2015-16. So that happened. And then another time we hiked into a creek, a really remote roadless area where there's a trail going down to this river. And we got there just at dark and just had finished making dinner and was getting ready to climb in the tent for the night. And just below us, we're on a bench about 30 feet above the creek bottom, at the very bottom of this really steep river ravine. And something down there started screaming at the top of its lungs so loud it shook your whole body. And it would repeat the sounds it was making about 6 or 8 times. And it was so intense in volume that literally I could feel it throughout my entire body, like my lungs were vibrating. And it was way louder than any wildlife I'd ever heard in my entire life living here. I'd say maybe the closest would be like an elephant or a lion roaring in volume. So it was just amazing. And so I just started getting more curious. I wanted to know, what is it that's out here in the woods that's not like our typical wildlife? The story of the Bigfoot attacks on the miners in the 1800s is called Indian Devils of the Sixes. And as I was reading through the stories, it names a bunch of people over a period of time that had either been attacked or killed, and other people had seen tracks at these river systems here locally. And so I found the book in the library that actually, the stories were published in 1935, I believe, by a local who had published them in a local newspaper. And so as I did more research, I actually found the mining claim records of the individuals named in the stories from the 1800s. And I have copies of the mining claims. And then there's a cemetery down there where these individuals are actually buried. So I was able to verify that the stories were true and the people named in the stories actually existed. They lived here and mined in the 1800s. So that was really fascinating. So when I went to the convention in Bend, Oregon, I met Mark Marcel, who's a historian, and he actually knew a little bit about the stories. So me and Mark started talking, and so he actually has visited the area several times. Over my years of experience researching Sasquatch, I don't feel like I've ever been in mortal danger. I actually feel like if these creatures were harmful to humans, they would have killed me by now, or killed more people in this area. So my friend Kevin has been helping cut firewood on my property, and he'd been working hard all week. So I figured there was a storm coming, and I wanted to go do something fun for a day. So I asked Kevin if he wanted to take the dogs and go down, go for a hike. So we decided, let's get out of here for a day and go enjoy the nice weather while it's still nice. So we drove down south to a little BLM park where, there's some trail systems and some beautiful, places to explore. So we're out there just wandering through the woods, letting the dogs play and run around. And I wandered off in a different direction, and I saw an opening in the forest, and I went towards the open area where it's a big sand dune. It's like a big bowl where there's open sand, no forest and trees. And I started skirting along the ridge line with my dog Floki, just exploring the area. And I remember coming down the side of there's like it's coastal pine forest, so there's like these dunes that the forest had grown over, and they run in ridges. So you'll have little depressions in the forest, and then little hills and depressions, and they run parallel, like, so they're long little ridges with trees and brush and huckleberries, and so it's really pretty. And we were skirting along the edge of the tree line next to this open area, heading south, and I went around this slope and around this little opening in the forest, and heard my dog and I heard voices. And I'm thinking, oh, there's other people out here, which was interesting. And when I heard the voices, normally I try to introduce myself to people out in the woods. I don't like to, I like to know who's around me. So I started walking towards the voices. And as we're going up this little ravine, towards the direction that I heard the voices, we're going uphill towards the top of the ridge line. And my dog, he started barking a little bit. He barked twice in the direction of the voices. So the second time we were about halfway up, I heard the voices again getting closer. And at that point, I hadn't seen anybody. And then, sorry, I'm getting nervous. Oh, I'm nervous. So we came around this huckleberry bush, and I could hear the voices again right over this direction. And Floki was right about there, and he barked twice in the direction of the voices. And we were right about here when I saw the first silhouette come into view just behind these tree branches. And when it came into view, I could see the side of the head, and it looked like a man in a ghillie suit, like a big man. And my dog, he barked twice at the voices, but he didn't bark really loud. And he was like being extra cautious, which I thought was odd, because normally he loves people and he's the first one to run up and introduce himself, even if you don't see them yet. He just takes off and he's like, oh, hi people, I'm here. So then as I'm walking about halfway up, I see this silhouette come up into the view at the top of the ridge line. And it's like I'm seeing the side profile, and it looks like a man in a ghillie suit. And I'm like looking at that, thinking, I was really confused, because why would somebody be out here in a ghillie suit? It didn't make sense. And so this individual came up into the clearing at the top of the ridge where I could see it really good. And it turned and faced me, and we locked eyes. And I said, hello? And it didn't respond back. And I'm just standing there frozen, and Floki actually stopped right in front of me, and he's staring at this individual too. And we're both frozen about 20, 25 feet from where it was standing, looking down at us. And I'm just like looking at it going, that's not a human. And my brain literally almost exploded at that point. I'm like, I'm looking at a Sasquatch. And then as it moved over here to the middle, behind the tree branches, had really good lighting. It turned and faced us. And I locked eyes with it, and that's when I realized I wasn't looking at a human. He was really big, and I could see the hair. And as soon as I realized I was looking at hair, that's when I knew I was looking at a Sasquatch. And so I was just standing here frozen, and it was staring back at us, and I felt like I couldn't move. And Floki was right here in front of me staring at it too. And then it started swaying back and forth for what seemed like forever. But now that I think about it, I think it was only, maybe 10 seconds before it walked out of view and went down over the bank to the left. And then right after it went out of sight, a second one came up right in the middle where it was standing, turned and faced us, and then it dove down the bank in the same direction the first one went. And then right after that one disappeared, I heard the brush crackling over to the right from the direction they had both came. So I was thinking there was a third one, but like, I'm frozen. I'm like literally felt like I couldn't move for at least 5 minutes. So we stood there and then staring at each other, and then it started swaying back and forth. And I could see the hair flowing. It wasn't matted or chunky or anything. It was like a well-groomed show dog. It was such beautiful color, too. It was a dark auburn. And like the face, I remember the eyes were really big. And the face was about the same color as the hair. And I'm just standing there frozen, not knowing what to do. So I've been around all kinds of wildlife in my life, and my brain could not figure out what to do. Don't run, I didn't feel like I could even take a step towards it if I wanted to. I literally felt frozen. And I'm just standing there staring at it as it's swaying back and forth, watching the hair move. And then it turns and walks away over the top of the ridge, down the side of the bank, out of sight. And I'm just standing there looking at the spot, listening, trying to figure out where it went. And then a second one came up, exactly where that one had been. It turned and looked at us, and it was a lot quicker than the first one. And then it dove from standing upright over the bank and followed the first one and disappeared out of my line of sight. And just as it went out of sight, I heard the brush crackling in the direction they had both came from. So then I'm standing there thinking, oh, is there 3? And at that point, I'm just in shock, trying to process what I had just seen. And I'm just standing there, staring at the spot, listening, thinking, okay, don't run, don't move, trying to work through what I knew to do in the past with other wildlife. So at that point, I think I stood there for a good 5 minutes. And so did my dog. It was like Floki didn't even move. He was frozen too. So finally, I mustered up enough courage to actually take a step. And I decided, well, I have to go see if they left tracks. But at that point, I had such a big adrenaline rush and I was so nervous. I didn't know where they'd went or if they, were still just around the corner in the brush. And I couldn't hear anything. That was the weirdest thing. It was so quiet. Like, I didn't hear brush snapping. I've heard all kinds of wildlife. I can hear deer. I've heard mountain lions stalking, and they all make noise. I can even hear my cat going through the woods when they're following me. And I couldn't hear anything. So finally, I snuck up there really stealthily to try to see if I could see any marks where they'd went through. And at that point, I decided to call Kevin and tell him what happened. So I called him on the cell phone, told him to come up where I was and meet me. Well, I investigated, the path that they took. And I'm nervous just talking about it. It's been several weeks, and I'm still, trying to remember all the details. There were so many little details that I'm trying to remember and how I felt. It was just, I try to compare it to when I was surrounded by mountain lions one time. I actually encountered mountain lions right here on my property. I live on 80 acres here in Oregon. And a couple of years ago, I was cutting a trail down along my property line to a creek bottom, and mountain lions came up. I don't know if they were stalking me or if they were just curious because I was cutting brush with a machete. But in that encounter, I wasn't frozen. I was terrorized. I was in mortal danger. I knew it. I was in dense coastal underbrush away from the roads. And if they would have killed me, nobody would have found my body. But that was a totally different feeling than this encounter. I literally felt like I couldn't move when I encountered the Sasquatch. When I encountered the mountain lions, I could still move. I could still think. I could still, process my thoughts and think about what to do and convince myself, don't run, and how to get out of there safely without being killed. But in this encounter, it was a totally different feeling. So it was like my brain didn't even know what to do. It was really strange. And I was like listening, scanning, to see if there was anything there. But I didn't see anything and I couldn't hear anything. So I grabbed Floki. Floki, come. Come right here with Mom. And I kept him behind me. And I came right around here and stopped right here. And this is where they had what went through. I went down over that bank and I couldn't see where they went and I couldn't hear anything. And I looked out in the open area and I couldn't see anything, like they didn't go that way because I couldn't see anybody walking across or anything going across the opening. So this is where I called Kevin and told him what happened and asked him to meet me up here and told him how to just follow the opening to where I'm at. And so he found me pretty easily. And this is about as far as I went. I could see there was big scuffs. The moss was kicked up. There was a big scuff under that huckleberry. I knew they were really big and I didn't know where they had went. And then when I was standing here, I heard a branch break out that direction in the forest. It went snap, like a really big branch. And that was all I heard. So yeah, this is where they were. I think Floki, my dog, felt something before I did because as we were going up the cut towards the voices, he froze first. After he barked twice, he stopped and just stood there staring in the direction the sound had came from. But at that point, I stopped too. And it's like I couldn't take a step forward. And that was right before they came into view. In the moment, it was like time froze. As soon as it turned and locked eyes on me and we're staring at each other, it seemed so much longer than it actually was. And I was asked later how long did I think my sighting was. And I was like trying to figure out how to time that in my mind. So I started counting how many times I thought I remembered it swaying. So the entire encounter was probably less than 20 seconds total, maybe 8 to 10 seconds with the first individual and less than, that with the second one. So maybe the entire thing was maybe 20 seconds, but it seemed like 10 minutes maybe. So I felt like I was looking at a human-like being, but it wasn't human. It was really hard to describe. It didn't seem like an animal to me. Very, very intelligent. And I think one of them stuck to the grass line and stayed up a little bit higher. And one of them went down, because I walked around the outer edge. And I think this is part of the original scuffs. And I was really careful to stay off of where they may have traveled. So we actually went down around this while I investigated the trackway. But yeah, see, it's rain, so a lot of it's filled in. But this is where one of them went down. And I think that's where the knuckle prints were. It was either there or over there's more scuffs. So one of them, I think, stayed on the high bank, and one of them went low, and then they both went back up into the woods here. Because there was nothing below, about halfway down, that was like no marks down below. Yeah, because one of them stayed up high. Yeah, that was the one I casted. I went back 5 times afterwards. So like right after that initial encounter, I was really super nervous, but I wanted to try to document the trackway where they had came through. So I'm back in the spot, or close to the area where I had my sighting. My heart is friggin' pounding. Oh my God. So this is what it looks like up in here. And so before Kevin got to where I was, I went up to the top and I briefly started videoing the scene where I saw big scuff marks. And I went like to the spot in the forest where they came from, but I didn't follow the way they had went because I didn't know if they were still there. So I was really super nervous about that. So I'm like in an open spot next to the trees trying to, video the marks that I found. And I was looking for big footprints, but I really just saw like scuffs and big impressions because it was like really thick pine needles and sand underneath. And then the shore grass, the seagrass is really thick. It didn't leave good impressions right there under the forest area. But I could see where some big things had moved through. So when Kevin got there, I was showing him the scuff marks and the direction they'd went. And we did look down around the side a little bit. And I tried to document that. But because it was late in the day, it was less than an hour before sunset, I felt like we should get back to the car. As we still had to go through the forest and make our way back to the trail because we went off trail and didn't have flashlights with us. And I did get a cast, so I wanted to mention the cast because it's like I watched the one go from upright to diving over the bank and down on all fours because I could see its hair on its back as it dove really fast down over the side. So the next day I went back to try to see the prints, and I actually did find what looks like big giant knuckle prints in the sand where they'd skirted around the side of the hill and went back up into the forest. I was so nervous. Even the next day or two, I was just like, oh my God. I was like shaking. What do you think, Floki? You saw them too, huh? It will be embedded in my brain forever. All right, this is it. This was my sighting spot. What was really interesting to me is that I actually prayed about this the night before. I was having a trouble with my faith, and I've been going through a lot of struggles in life, went through a horrible divorce, domestic violence, and it's just been a rough couple of years. And I was in bed that night, and I asked God, if you're real, I want to see Bigfoot before I die. And the very next day, I saw 2. Wow. That happened. It feels almost surreal. I don't know what's going to happen in the future, but I'm not as afraid of the future as I was. About uncertainties. I'm still struggling with, life and everything, but I think everything's going to be okay. All right, Floki, I'm going to let you go. Come on. I'm just going to bail straight down the side.